What's up, everybody? Welcome to the MSP Water Cooler. I am your host, Jonathan Schofield. My friends call me Scofie, and I am joined today by our co-host, the one, the only, Jeffrey Newton. Say hi, Jeffrey. How you doing?
What's up, everybody? And of course, Scofie. Here we are, back at the water cooler to talk about, everyone's most loved and most hated topic in the MSP space.
Oh my gosh, is it not? Is it not? If you are here for the first time and you are not familiar with the format at the MSP Water Cooler, this is not your stereotypical webinar. We don't have a PowerPoint today. We don't have like 10 things to ram down your throat. We don't have any sales pitches or pithy things to just like that you didn't really ask for. In fact, ask is the word. The format is all about you. So if you are in the IT services industry, you're an MSP business owner, IT service provider, you are responsible for sales, revenue, business development, marketing, growth in some kind of capacity in your IT services business. This is for you. And this is for you to ask the tough questions related to the challenges that you face in growing your IT services business. And Jeffrey and I are supposed to sweat with those questions. And we've been around a little bit. We've seen some stuff. We've learned some things. We've been in the trenches ourselves in our own way. And we don't necessarily have all of the answers. But between us and everybody else watching with us today, there is a depth of knowledge and insight that you can tap into on today's episode of the MSP Water Cooler. So we're thrilled that you're here. If you want Jeffrey and myself to wrestle with your question, here's how you do it. So if you're watching this on LinkedIn or on YouTube, you can drop your question in the chat. We love for you to do that. Try and keep it as direct and useful as possible, or direct as possible, so we can digest it and get right into answering your question and discussing it together. Our preferred method, however, if you're brave, is to use the StreamYard studio link that is in the comments. And we got our producer, Sam Disraeli, backstage. We love you, Sam. Thank you for being here. He will also drop that StreamYard link again for those of you who are having a difficult time finding it. And you can join us backstage on screen. We'll pull you on screen and let you ask us your question live. We'll give you about a minute, minute and a half tops to share what's on your mind. Could be an observation, but bonus points if it's a question related to something that you've seen, something you're actively dealing with, you genuinely need practical, tactical help with. And Jeffrey and I will then kick you out of the studio. And then, just like a radio show, we'll discuss. And before we get started, if you've seen any of the promotion for today's episode of the MSP Water Cooler, you may have noticed a little bit of a Matrix-inspired theme, red pill versus blue pill. And we'll explain what that means in a little bit more detail momentarily. But the gist of it is bonus points if your question is related to taking ownership of your own destiny as pertains to growing the business. So blue pill being you're going to wake up to the truth that no one's coming to save you and you're going to do it. Red pill being you got all the excuses in the world why it's not working. And, share your thoughts on that. If it's not related to that, that's fine. We have, if it's related to SDRs or cold calling or building lists or onboarding or hiring or firing salespeople, building comp plans, I don't care what it is, closing deals, whatever it is, we want your question. So we already have a gentleman backstage that we want to bring on to kind of prime the pump. So I see you backstage, Jeff. Get your camera on. We'll bring you on here in a second to showcase your question or observation here momentarily. But while we're waiting to bring Jeff on stage, Jeffrey, before we get started, thoughts on today's theme?
Oh my God. I have so many thoughts. Like, I loved the fact that this was going to be the topic. I hoped that people were brave enough to come on here and ask the challenging questions to determine any aspect that lays in between what you just described. Like, the pills in each hand and like the space in between is where all of that anxiety and agony lives. So I can't wait for the questions. And if no one shows up to ask one, then I can certainly just monologue for an hour on the topic alone, because there's that much trauma on the inside.
and you won't be monologuing alone, because I think any entrepreneur, any business leader who has taken the idea of growth seriously has
Mhm.
confronted with this reality that there's no easy button.
Yeah.
And so I know that we both have some trauma that we could bond all over and share, and hopefully that's useful to people watching.
Yeah.
But ultimately, what I want for you guys watching is hope. So on the other side of this conversation, I want you to feel like you could run through a brick wall and conquer the world, because spoiler alert, you can.
Yeah.
So, all right, without further ado, Sam, let's bring our first guest on screen. Jeff Sumner, OG
Oh,
of the stream. We're so glad that you're here. How are you doing, Jeff?
I'm good. I'm trying to get used to the reverse camera thing. It goes a different way that I'm used to. Yeah. So,
Well, we're thrilled to have you. I'm
thank
just
you.
dying to know what your thoughts are on this topic are, and if you have a specific question or observation you'd like to see Jeffrey and I wrestle with, bring it on, brother.
Well,
You got about a minute and a half.
I was trying to think of a question. I couldn't think of a question, so I'll do an observation. And I might be guilty of this too sometimes, but it seems like our industry, meaning just the MSP side, seems to be guilty of, oh, I can't do that. I
Mhm.
can't do that because my clients won't want me to do that. I can't change tech stack because my employees will get upset. So many things. I think we live in fear of doing what is right for us, and the rest will follow, right? I need to change the tech stack because we'll make more profit. Well, your team should follow with that. You can't be like, oh, my senior tech will get upset. Uh, I feel like sometimes, and again, myself included, sometimes the tail's wagging the dog, right? And we forget we are in this business, or you should be. And I've spoken about this before, to take care of your family. That should be your number one thing, and then make sure the rest follows, right? You're not going to,
Mhm.
do things poorly for your employees, right? You're not going to do that, but don't keep sacrificing yourself, right? So I don't know if there's a question somewhere in there, or that you can kick around, or you could be like, next caller, whichever is good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there is almost too much meat on that bone, Jeff. We're gonna kick you out, and
All right.
I'd love for you to reiterate your question on the LinkedIn stream to juice the algorithm, if you don't mind.
Yes.
But we're glad that you're here. And Jeffrey, we're going to take this away as soon as we get Jeff out of here. Thank you for that, Jeff. And while we jump into this, if you've got a burning observation or question and you're watching, and I'm seeing online, we have a nice little group of people here hanging out with us today. Don't be shy, even if it's just to say hello and let us know that you're watching, where you're watching from, how you're feeling about stuff. And then obviously to queue up our next question, just to reiterate, you can do what Jeff did and be brave. Use that StreamYard link, hop in the back end, we'll bring you on screen, or just ask us in the comments. We love that too. So don't be shy. We're glad that you're here. Jeffrey, taking
Yeah.
care of your family, why are you in business? All of these things that Jeff said, the existential reality of why. And I think that's a really relevant connector to our theme for today. What do you think?
Yeah, my mind was sort of racing initially with his observation, right? Because there were different ways to start slicing that. And I was trying to really anchor into the sales and the growth experience element of like what fundamentally from like a first principles standpoint, and there's many, but the first one that came to my mind was mindset. First of all, he's absolutely right with his observation. I experienced it firsthand. I was it firsthand until I wasn't anymore. And so I think that's sort of the shift, the evolution that we're really talking about. In fact, I had a text conversation with one of my first reps when I switched to building and growing sales teams earlier this morning. And ironically enough, the conversation was focused around, do you realize the story arc of your journey is so similar to all of the MSP owners that are still struggling to crack the code on growth? Because he came in as an SDR, zero experience in the tech space, zero technical aptitude, just a young, hungry person willing to lean into sales. In other words, like willing to show up and get punched in the face long enough to figure out how to duck them, right?
Right.
And eventually went on to be an insanely successful sales rep, still is in the tech space. And I want to interview him because I want to break down like what were those nuggets, right? From your firsthand perspective. I have my own observations. I led you, sure, but like that was the thing. And where this is going is like mindset is the thing. Like you have to have a mindset that is malleable enough and open enough. When I was one of my CEOs along the way was gracious enough to open my mind and my eyes to the difference between a fixed mindset and growth mindset, which underneath that alone is really about what can you control, right? And so the thing I loved most about stepping into a sales role is every single day there were no excuses at the end of the day. Like it was me versus me every day, and I either did or I did not put up the win. And so I had to force myself into becoming the person that could win and would win those sales opportunities. And there's like a whole ton of stuff nested underneath that. But the very first thing I wanted to focus on is it, above all else, I think it is mindset. And I think the first step in mindset, specific to like stepping out onto the growth branch, the sales branch, is give yourself permission to suck. Like accept the fact that you're going to be doing it for the first time, and it's perfectly fine to suck and learn how to get better along the way. But like I think so many of us don't like the vulnerability or the discomfort that being uncomfortable requires to truly stay committed long enough to push through it till you don't suck anymore.
So I love everything you shared. I tried the other day to take our AI likenesses, Jeff, and I tried to create a scene using AI that imitated that that iconic scene from the Matrix where Neo is dodging the bullets.
Yeah.
If you don't know what I'm talking about, then I can't help you. It's an obvious iconic scene, and AI failed in making anything that I could use. But the idea behind it was one of us standing there, and then these sales objections or common lies that MSP business owners tell themselves starts flying at one of us, and then of course dodging them. The idea behind it, dodging the objection, and some of those included such things as, "Well, I'm not a salesperson,"
Right.
or "My market is too small for this,"
Yeah.
or "I'm really more of an engineer," or you know, all the things that you and I hear all the time, and
Right.
some of those thoughts that you've probably said to yourself at one point, Jeff. And I share that because, like, when you talk about mindset and the willingness to suck at it at first,
Yeah.
right? This is what separates the dreamers, the people who have dreams, from those who have a fantasy. There are those of you who are running IT services businesses, or you're fulfilling your function in the IT services world, and you have a fantasy of what success looks like, of what a growing, thriving business that you can be proud of looks like. And there's this idea in your head. And when it comes to actually executing towards achieving that, there is no plan, there is no responsibility or accountability or ownership of the path that's going to be required to get there. And if you're hearing this and you're like, well, you don't know me, you don't know me. It's like, no, the difference between the fantasy and the dream is really only this. You've written down what that future state looks like somewhere, and you've committed to executing everything and anything within your power faithfully towards achieving that goal. And a dream and a fantasy are not the same. And you can quickly tell who the dreamers are because they don't give up. They try things and they suck at them. And then they try something else and they suck at that. And then they try something and they stick with it, and they try it again and they try it again. And every time they do it, they suck maybe a little bit less. And then the faithfulness of effort, like the bleeding, sweating, and crying applied faithfully to that proven process over time, is where you see the results. So when we're talking about red pill versus blue pill, the idea is like, if you're going to take the blue pill, that means you got to be honest with yourself about the excuses you're making and commit to sucking today so that tomorrow can be what you hope it to be. That's a bit of a soapbox there, but I love what you shared with us backstage, Jeff. I appreciate that observation. It's really spawned a great existential rabbit trail for us to explore just now. I'm here for it. Before we transition here, who else wants to be brave? Do we have any other questions in the chat? I don't see anybody yet, though we have several folks online. So my assumption is going to be, if you're watching this, man, you've got it locked down. What are your questions you have for us? So come join us backstage and get on screen, or ask us a question in the chat. All right, let's wrap this thought up. All right, Jeffrey, final observations on this particular track.
The magic word that you mentioned, and I was wondering when it would come up on this whole topic, not the question, but the overall topic of red pill, blue pill, was commitment. I'm sure I'll jump into a soapbox a little bit later to really understand why, but like that is the word that matters. That is the separator. The other thing you described, which my way of always coaching it, was disciplined action over time, right? Consistent disciplined action over time is the thing. Like there's no avoiding it. The last thing maybe I would give as a metaphor is like, I'm not a golfer. I enjoy golfing. I was on a golf league at one point in my life, and I was riding with an older gentleman, and I was so pissed. I was like the one dude who always like bent clubs over his leg or threw it in the sand, right? I forget his name because don't even watch the sport, but I know that one of those personalities existed, and that was kind of me. And then the older fine gentleman found a coachable moment to be like, basically, what's your expectation of yourself? Like, how often do you golf? I don't know, I was like 30 years old, probably my first year actually doing any real golf. He's like, so you stroll up straight from work, stressed as hell, pull out your clubs, come to the course and start. Like, how good do you expect yourself to be with how little you've actually put into this? I'm like, wow, fundamental reframe, right, of the mind. And as soon as I changed my mindset and my attitude towards it, I had the most fun for the next 2 years, just, participating in the action and learning and growing. I think that's one way to tie it back to the mindset of how you need to embrace it. Like, give yourself permission to look at it differently and experience it differently. Find the opportunity to learn and grow.
Oh man, that word you shared about expectations, and Helen, I see your comment, and we're definitely want to pull you on screen here in a second and unpack this, because there's a lot in your comment. I see that, Helen. So we haven't forgotten you. We're coming to that shortly, I promise. this idea of what you expect of yourself. Okay. So your expectations versus reality, right? And I see this all the time in the forums and on calls with IT providers every day. And they're like, well, we tried digital marketing. Okay. Digital marketing doesn't work. They'll say that. And we tried pay-per-click. Pay-per-click doesn't work. We tried cold calling. Cold calling doesn't work. We try, and then it's like, okay, so like let's unpack those things, right? What did you expect? It's kind of like your mentor on the golf course. It's like, you showed up, you threw $500 at Google Maps for a month, and nobody called your phone number. And your assumption was Google Ads doesn't work. By the way, I'm not saying go spend money on Google Ads necessarily, but I'm saying like that idea of what did you expect? When you put the minimum level of effort, the minimum level of investment, the minimum level of seeking to master this craft in front of you, and then you put all this burden on such a fragile thing, and you are setting yourself up for such disappointment. Right. Because I think ultimately what's happening with a lot of business leaders in our world, Jeffrey, is they have hit a plateau of growth where, man, referrals were coming in for a long while in the business, and that was sufficient for a time. And then we hit this plateau where there was as much money walking out the door as there was referrals coming in the door, and there's stagnation that follows. And they had up till now never really had to put on the sales pants.
Yeah.
And there's a distaste for it for a lot of folks, or a fear or a misunderstanding of it. And so they go into like, well, how are other people getting customers? And they throw resources at it, mash potatoes against the wall in desperate hope that they can abdicate their responsibility, comfortably continue to swallow the red pill and live in their apathetic disconnection from the ownership of the growth problem, or in your own MSP experience, take the blue pill, realize that it's going to take some elbow grease and commitment. So the expectation, that is a really key thing. What are you expecting of yourself in your own equation for your own dream? Or are you still holding to a fantasy?
Right.
All right, we got to bring Helen's question on screen. Sam, let's unpack this. How do you learn to get better? Did you have your team watch sales calls and provide feedback? Did you speak to as many successful MSP salespeople as possible to try to find how they sold, to find your own way? When did you say, I found my way to navigate these calls? Let me break operations. How much time went into this trial and error? Well, this is really complimentary to what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
Take a crack at it, Jeffrey.
Yeah, and knowing Helen and her knowing my story, I could see where she's laced in some desire to get some of the goodies out of it, which I appreciate, Helen. But I almost kind of want to answer that in reverse, because it comes back to expectations. Like the final thing she had mentioned was basically time frame, right? How long did it take to? And I think first and foremost, that's the one thing that we don't give ourselves enough of, because of the expectations that we place on ourselves, and oftentimes the expectations are wrong. So in the situation of my story, my growth and how I cracked that code the way that she's asking, is we introduced service to generate net new cold outbound leads, right? Which is a drastically different sales process than referrals, which is a different conversation for a different day. But at any rate, we started getting leads that we had to close. And so like the first line she had is, what did I do? Or how did I focus on getting better? How did I figure out how to get better and evolve? And the first thing I did was realizing I was showing up to those meetings as the sales rep with completely different expectations than the prospect, meaning they showed up mostly for like information and curiosity, and I showed up because I wanted a contract. And so like realizing that our expectations were misaligned at first did multiple things. One, I had to change it of how I approached those conversations, but two, it really made me curious and interested to figure out what frame, what doorway, what expectation did this prospect walk through to come to this 15-minute meeting with me. It's like, well, I'm going to go find that out by listening to the recordings, right? I wasn't doing the cold calling in that aspect. It was just showing up as a calendar appointment. And it didn't take more than maybe 3 or 4 phone calls of recorded calls to listen and be like, oh my God, never, ever, ever say that again, ever. Like my stomach was doing all of the churning, right? Only because I had lived and breathed MSP for so long. I'm like, you would never say that to a client. You'd never say that to a prospect. And so, but how could I get my caller to understand the context that I had? So it was really more like sinking into the emotional resonance of like, how did that make me feel? Just listening to that conversation as a third party, and then understanding the emotion and the empathy required for the prospect that was on the phone of like, say this, not that, do this, not that, and really started building out a framework of scripts and conversation elements that focused genuinely on the needs of the prospect, which I know is a novel idea, but aligning that as the KPI really started like turning up the volume of opportunity that I got, right? And I don't know super in depth, but that'd be like the first element was I got as close to the source as possible, as often as possible. And I did so with an open mind. And I put myself in the other person's shoes with a high level of empathy to try to understand how would I have thought, felt, acted, responded in the same situation. And is that aligned or congruent with the result I was trying to get?
So we have our second brave soul backstage, and Sam brought her on. Ellen, so good to see you again. How have you been?
Living the dream. But every day this week's been a Monday for me. So fires everywhere.
I feel that. I feel that on an existential level. Well, we're glad that you're here, and thank you for such a deep question. I would love for you to kind of reiterate it, or maybe now that you've heard Jeffrey's response, and I know you've spoken to Jeffrey before and probably heard parts of this obviously before, but what's on your mind? You got about 1.5 minutes before we boot you out.
So I just have a question, actually. When you were talking about being misaligned and like, did you get everything in line with the prospects or the people that you were meeting with by finding the right questions, or was it by listening to the people and finding out their needs, where to go from there?
Yes, and so is the connection of those two things, right? I think I was fortunate in how my story unfolded in that I got my ass humbled really, really fast when I switched from being the sales engineer to the sales rep, and had done everything the same way, and then got, told, thanks, I went a different direction. And I was like, whoa, what's going on? So that part of the story was that individual who said no was willing to tell me why. And then I leaned in to understand the buying process, right? I had no idea, which is so stupid and so ignorant and so arrogant, that in a sales situation, there is a buying process, right? Because everything out there about sales teaches you the sales process, the sales tactics, the sales, everything. It's like, well, that's great, but sales reps don't close deals, buyers do. So
That's right.
Really understanding the buying side of it and reverse engineering everything that I was doing to be aligned to what the buyer was going to do anyway. Then I switched from selling them to just guiding them to the outcome that they already wanted. And the whole dynamic of the entire motion, I like to call it a motion, not a process, changed as well. And so, yes, it was the questions, but it was like genuine, empathetic, endearing questions with an actual desire to understand their situation as well as what they wanted as an outcome. Because the best and worst part of MSP is it's everything to everyone. So it's nothing to no one at the same time. So then you're in that situation where you're trying to figure out what's the outcome you want. And most people will freeze in that regard. Because it's kind of like, well, it's complicated, or we do this thing, or we use these tools, or like a plethora of stuff that doesn't matter.
That's right.
And
That's
instead, like, pull that thread of like, okay, well, the beauty is I'm universal. You don't need to know that. If you tell me that your outcome is this, I know how to wrap what I do around giving you your outcome as a byproduct of our service.
That's right.
It was like really that mindset shift for me. And then obviously breaking it down into calibrated questions and all sorts of other stuff. But it really came down to like tactical empathy questions and truly caring about the buyer. And that was sort of like the qualification process.
That's right. That's right. Helen, very, very great question. And I'm going to speak to it too. But for the sake of time, I'm going to kick you out. I'm so glad that you hopped on. Thank you for being
thanks,
brave.
Sam.
And I love that question. Here's my observation on that. And it really piggybacks off of what you just shared, Jeffrey. The paradox in our industry is every day I see on Reddit and the Facebook groups and the forums, business owners saying, I need more leads, I need more customers. And then the answers and solutions to that I see all the time are very like tactical, transactional approaches to basically order taking. Let's call it what it is.
Yeah.
And the paradox being, folks, we find ourselves in an industry where you're not selling pizzas or shoes or a SaaS product I can add to cart and check out. And what you said earlier about like, because MSP is applicable to everyone, it is in fact, depending on how you position it, applicable to no one.
Right.
Literally just this morning, I was on a call with an IT provider and we were working together with the business development reps. And the owner was like, well, should I take this IT buyer's guide that we have, like that a vendor has given them? It's like a generic IT buyer's guide they can slap their logo on. And should we use this as a business development asset so we can call people and offer to send them this buyer's guide? And my answer was, you can do that. That's a thing you can do. But you are presuming with that call that the prospect is in fact a buyer, and that this guide is relevant to them in any capacity, right? So going back to what you said, becoming incredibly empathetic with who your customer is, you need to become obsessive about the mind of your customer.
Yeah.
Right? You can't just say, I'm going to slap marketing resources at the problem of sales and they'll come. Man, You're not Domino's. You can't send a coupon email to 10,000 people and increase your order volume over the weekend by 45% or something like that. That is not how it works. And I think at your core as an IT provider, you know that. You must know that. If you reverse engineer every customer relationship you have and where it came from, right? 9 out of 10 MSPs will tell me that their last client came to them from word of mouth or referral. There's a reason for that.
Mhm.
And if you can unpack and understand the reasons why, the mind of the buyer that brought them to that scenario where the referral happened, now all of a sudden, tactically, what you're going to deploy when it comes to going to market, it's not going to be just output of just anything and everything we can possibly say, AI, cybersecurity, compliance. It's like, no, you, Mr. Customer, I get you.
Yeah.
I know you, and I understand. And where you're coming from is something that I am learning to master. And I think I have something that will be very valuable to you.
Yeah.
Anyways, so great question. Great question, Helen. Thank you so much for being here. We do have about 15 minutes left before we kind of wrap up. So we do have time for another question or two. Either be brave like Helen and Jeff and jump on screen with us. Drop your question or observation in the comments. And I see Sam, our producer, has been having fun with AI here. We love you, Sam. Thank you so much for being here. While we're wrapping up and while we're waiting to see if any other questions come, I want to hear from you, Jeffrey, right? Like if you could go back and jump ahead to that moment where you realized you needed to take the blue pill.
Yeah.
What would you tell yourself back then?
It is a great question. And I think it would probably thread the needle of a few of the things we've talked about and around so far today, which is, and there's a bit of choreography to this. I mean, having one, done it personally, and then two, turned around and built teams and ran teams to make them walk through that same process. I think there is, one, it's teachable and it is transferable. So first of all, know that you're capable of it, right? Or know that you're not, that you don't want to put in the work or the effort. You're not actually committed to the thing that you're asking for or saying that you want. And I love the fact that you used the word commitment. I typed it out so I wouldn't forget it, because when I ran sales orgs for 2 large MSPs, the back half of my career, when I made the switch from the one I was at to the one where I finished, I had 3 questions for the owner. And I think it does boil down to this essence. Do you know your number? Have you forgotten where you came from? And are you committed to the goal? I can leave the first 2 there and just talk about commitment. Commitment to me, being asked as the sales leader to come in and grow their MRR by 50% year over year, 3 years in a row, when they'd only ever had referral-led growth at about 4% a year before that. Like, the numbers didn't scare me because I know it was all possible. But I also knew at that point I wasn't going to set myself up for failure, because I knew it was necessary to hit the kind of numbers they were asking for, which is why the third question mattered. Like, are you committed to the goal that you're asking me to hit? They can say yes if they want, but if they aren't going to carve out a GL account called marketing that didn't exist before that request came through, and then they're not going to carve out the amount of money it took to earmark for that GL account, to invest in the business, to produce the outcome over the course of time, there were 2 stipulations. One, this is the number that I need from you if that's the number that you want. And 2, you are not entitled to make any decisions around this function of the business for 12 months. Why? I had to insulate the work that had to go into the process from the emotional reaction to cutting that check every month, or I knew that I would have been dead on arrival at about day 45 when they were thinking about cutting the second check. And we're still about 4 months away from any visible progress in the form of MRR. So, like, commitment is absolutely one of the key ingredients. And outside of that, giving yourself permission is probably one of the greatest unlocks mentally to mindset. to shift your expectations and then change the dynamic entirely. But if you lack the commitment, and you said it earlier, like if you can't write it down even, right, and then talk about it with one other person or publicly or your whole team, like
That's right.
you're just setting yourself up for a hell of a lot of pain and frustration. And then you're going to blame everything and everyone else that it didn't work and it doesn't work, which would take me down a different diatribe about the difference between strategy and tactics. I think we could unpack that. And that's really what we're talking about there is like Google AdWords don't work. Well, that can't be true because there are a lot of businesses that do it, right? Successfully. The strategy is there. Maybe the tactics and how it was applied for you, if you outsourced it or how you applied it, weren't accurate. So like change the tactics, but the strategy still sound.
That's right. Oh man, I absolutely love this. We have a question from Randy, and I want to make sure that we bring this up and talk about it because there's another audience here that needs to hear some stuff about what we're talking about. This is the teeniest bit of a shift, and I wanted to make sure we do it with a little bit of the time that we have left because it's such an important question for the vendors who support MSPs to hear. All right. I spend a lot of time with vendors in the MSP channel, in the IT services space, some of which who do a really great job, some of which who want to do a really great job at empowering their MSP partners to go find new business, as your question is here. Are there any vendor resources or marketing support you find valuable in terms of finding new business? Okay, so Randy, I know you and I know where you're coming from. And I'm going to say this with love. I'm going to hold your hand as I say it, and then not just saying it to you, saying it to every enterprise vendor in the space that works with MSPs. Like your white paper, your case study, your kill sheet, your cybersecurity graph will not earn your partner a new customer. The resource itself will not, right? The asset, you know, what I have seen to be most valuable when vendors genuinely, beyond lip service and PDFs, say they want to actually partner in their MSP, in their customers' growth, effectively, their partners' growth. These are the ones that are getting shoulder to shoulder in the trenches to help them solve for some of these challenges that they have, to speak truth to their partners and show them how in the partnership, Mr. or Miss MSP, this is how I make you money. This is how I save you time. This is how I make you stickier with your customers. And if your products or services don't have legitimate answers to at least two of those three, you are very likely going to find frustration in your partnerships, and your partners are going to find frustration with you.
Yeah.
So it's and it has to be real, because I don't know that I've come across any vendor who has said, "No, we don't do those things." They all say they do. It has to be real. So that's tough love, not just for you, Randy, but for all of the vendors. It doesn't mean that there can't be some value in the marketing resources and assets that you guys provide in your partner portals and these different things. I know a lot of MSPs are desperate for any meaningful content, but if anyone on this call can attribute a deal they closed because of a vendor one sheet that was given to them, please prove me wrong. I've yet to come across it.
Yeah. And I would
What are your thoughts, Jeffrey?
I would agree with what you're saying, and I would offer just the subcontext or the subtext of why I believe it's ineffective. And that is similar to how I got humbled when I first was getting cold leads handed to my calendar, right? The expectations were different. Prospect showed up with one thing, I showed up with another. If you're talking vendor MSP and MSP is serving end client, the vendor's expectations and interests are flawed. They don't think far enough or deep enough. And I am a vendor now, and I can still talk shit about them because the problem is true. It's still the same issue. They don't solve through the problems they create for the customer they're serving. So they fail to acknowledge that their solution creates one or more additional problems for that person. Or said differently, they don't go all the way through to the MSP's end client. So like those white papers, the one sheets, all that stuff, is usually written and created more as a sell to and not a sell through, right? Like what should matter is what matters to the end customer of the MSP, and position and message that way. Don't position and message so that the MSP understands why they should be selling or buying the thing. Like the sales slick shouldn't be the same as the buying slick, because it's like a Russian doll or a two-layered onion in that regard, right? You're the vendor selling to the MSP because you want them to represent your wares, but the MSP has to turn around and sell it to their client. And you also oftentimes vendors don't acknowledge the fact that sales is such a challenge for most MSPs. So like, I'm struggling to sell my services. How do you expect me to be able to sell yours, especially when you arm me with stuff that my buyer is not going to care about? That's fundamentally what the issue is. That's like, we could go hours deep, but the main point is messaging and positioning are far more effective than any amount of marketing you're ever going to do. And if you don't spend the amount of time you need to on messaging and positioning first, then that's where you're going to end up saying marketing doesn't work, because the tactic versus the strategy is like you're shoving the wrong words out a larger megaphone, basically.
That's right. That's right. I have more thoughts, but we are running out of time, and I want to make sure that we share kind of a bit of a teaser for 2 weeks from now when we have our next episode of the MSP Water Cooler. So first of all, to the folks who've been watching online and who are watching this recording back later, we see you. We appreciate you. Thank you for being here. If you asked us a question today and engaged with us in the chat, that means so much. I'm very grateful for your presence here, and hopefully it was as valuable to you as it was meaningful for us to get the opportunity to serve you in this way. So we are committed to doing this every other week. And next time we're here, we're bringing a special guest, many of whom you know and love. You will see it announced later on publicly, but I'm sharing with you now, if you're watching, Adam Belansky of Frictionless IT. He is a well-beloved figure in the space, and many of you know him, and he'll be joining Jeffrey Newton and I in 2 weeks, and we'll see if we can't do something a little special for that live stream. We're going to also be doing more things like this where we bring special guests to feature. We're working on a lineup for the rest of this year. If you have an interest in collaborating with us or being featured on the MSP Water Cooler, reach out to me, send me a DM. I'm happy to chat with you about it. And if you had a burning question, that Jeffrey and I were not able to get to today, 2 things you can do. It's not too late. Go ahead and drop it in the comments, and we'll circle back to it next time we're here, or we'll just engage with you on chat. Jeffrey and I are both pretty active, and you can, or just DM us, or even better, join us for the next episode of the MSP Water Cooler and jump on screen just like Helen and Jeffrey did today, and Jeff, and ask us live. So grateful for that you're here. Jeffrey, any closing thoughts from you before we wrap up?
No, only closing thought, in case the next week folks are watching this week, is you can see what you get when you do show up and ask the question, which ironically enough is so much of what it takes in sales to be successful.
That's
So
right.
maybe somebody practice doing something uncomfortable 2 weeks from now and showing up on camera and asking the question.
Yes. Show up in 2 weeks and tell us the story of how you took the blue pill and what the results of that were for 2 weeks. What uncomfortable thing did you embrace in the 2 previous weeks? Man, I would love that. I would love to hear from you guys what your experience has been. All right, we're going to wrap up. I appreciate you all. Thank you so much for being here. We'll catch you at the next MSP Water Cooler. Be well.